The Atlanta Hawks, despite the fact that Joel Embiid has played pretty much like he's entirely healthy, have somehow managed to take a 3-2 lead on the Philadelphia 76ers. And while there are a lot of fingers to point, and I do mean a lot, one of those biggest fingers to point has to be the one pointing at Ben Simmons. Ben has been one of the most interesting and polarizing and talked about and really thus over-criticized players in the league pretty much ever since he became a player in the league. I've often found myself in the last few years on the side of defending Ben Simmons because I genuinely think he is very much overly criticized. However, as much as I don't like being critical of Ben Simmons and I tend to lean in the direction of defending him, I can't ignore what he has been doing in the playoffs so far. He absolutely deserves to have a finger pointed at him, and honestly, because of how the playoffs really highlight your weaknesses, it's only made me lower and lower on Ben Simmons this year. So let's talk about Ben Simmons and his playoff woes. Before I continue on with this video, about half of the people that watch these videos are not subscribed, so if you fall into that 50%, then please subscribe. I am trying to hit 200K on this channel by the end of the year, so it would be much appreciated. Also, drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second, and it makes a massive difference. Also, real quick, I have a new video over on my film channel that most of you probably don't even know about, but over there I do analysis and just talk about games, movies, TV shows, stuff like that, and I just put a video out on Bo Burnham's Inside. I intend to put a review out there for A Quiet Place Part 2, as well as Invincible, so if that's some content that would interest you, that link is going to be in the description, pinned comment, card above. So, why is Ben being so criticized outside of the normal things that Ben is always criticized for? Well, the number one thing right now has to be the free throw shooting. However, I'm going to save that for a little bit later, just simply because that's the obvious one, and I think I have a pretty good point to make about it. As I mentioned earlier, weaknesses get exploited in the playoffs, weaknesses stand out in the playoffs, and Ben Simmons has some pretty well documented weaknesses. And no, I do not really mean the jump shot. That one's kind of obvious. Everyone knows about that weakness to the point where discussing it isn't much worth it. The biggest issue right now outside of that free throw shooting is that the Hawks in particular have been hiding smaller guards and wings that just don't have what it takes to match up against Ben Simmons on him, and he's not able to punish them because he is not aggressive. The Hawks have been putting Bogdan Bogdanovic, who's about 6'4", 6'5" on a good day. Ben Simmons probably has at least 40 pounds on him, and only occasionally does he actually attack that matchup. Almost any 6'10", 230 forward with great athleticism and good length and strength and all of that stuff would take advantage of that matchup every time. Ben Simmons does it sometimes, and the issue with that is that on top of the fact that he can't pressure the defense with an outside shot, to say the least, he also can't pressure them to not give him a mismatch because he's not going to take advantage of it. At that point, your contribution scoring-wise is very little. People understandably point the finger at Ben Simmons' lack of an outside shot, but really, it's when you just don't put pressure on the defense, period, that it becomes a problem. You cannot have a jump shot and still put pressure on the defense. But Ben doesn't do that. When Ben has the ball and he has a mismatch, he only selectively takes advantage of it. He's only averaged around 8 shots per game in this Hawks series. And when he doesn't have the ball, he's not being defended on the perimeter, so he's liability there. And because of that, he doesn't even bother standing on the perimeter, so instead he stands in the dunker spot down low in the way of Joel Embiid. There's multiple possessions that you can see with Embiid in this series where he's having to take a fadeaway because there's like 2 defenders in the paint because Ben Simmons is right under the basket. So offensively, what does he bring to this team outside of playmaking, which even isn't as effective as it would be if he was a good scorer? What does he bring? Because outside of that playmaking, a guy who interrupts spacing, doesn't attack, doesn't take advantage of mismatches, and really is only that good on the fast break. In the half-court offense, Ben Simmons is just a straight-up negative. If I'm being charitable, I'll say that he's neutral in the half-court, but I'm not feeling particularly charitable right now. Of course, he's still a phenomenal defender, can't take that away from him, so that would definitely make him still a positive overall, but offensively, he's not. At least not in this series, that is. But now let's talk about Ben's biggest issue in this series and in the playoffs thus far that stands out in particular, and that is the free throw shooting. Ben is shooting 22 of 67 from the line in the playoffs, which is a groundbreaking 32.8%, meaning he averages 0.65 points per possession at the line. It's important to note that point per possession because Ben is getting a treatment that is being compared to Hack-a-Shaq, but the reality is Hack-a-Shaq is considerably better for Shaq's teams of the past by comparison to what the Sixers are getting out of Ben Simmons right now. See, the concept of Hack-a-Shaq was always coming from the stance of if he's under the basket, foul the shit out of him. Sometimes they would just intentionally foul him straight up, but ultimately it would prove to not be that valuable, so it was not a consistent thing. But Shaq, for his career, shoots about 74% under the basket, which means he averages 1.48 points per possession at the rim. So if he is going to get under the basket and you can just knock the shit out of him instead of letting him lay it up, that's a win from the math. Because he shoots 52.7% from the line for his career, meaning he averaged just 1.05 point per possession at the line. So the math checks out. If Shaq is just right under the basket and you need to stop him from scoring, just hack him because he's less likely to score as many points as he would if he just got a layup opportunity. But the thing is, just over 1 point per possession was a little bit better than league average in Shaq's time as a player. So statistically speaking, Shaq going to the free throw line and shooting 52%, going 1 of 2, was a good thing for his team. It's ultimately a good possession if you can score 1 point every possession on average. So if you're good on the court and Shaq gets fouled once, puts up 1 point, that averages out to a middle of the pack offense. And actually in his era, a slightly better than middle of the pack offense, creeping towards top 10. So when teams hacked Shaquille O'Neal, they were taking the lesser of the two bad things because giving up 1 point, still not great, but better than giving up 2. But Ben, on the other hand, is often intentionally fouled, and not even fouled because he puts pressure on the defense, just because, hey, it's not a good possession for the Sixers because ultimately 1 of 2 from the line would still be a little bit worse than average in today's league per possession. But on top of that, he doesn't go 1 for 2 from the line. When Ben averages 0.65 points per possession, that's not good. That math is not good for the Sixers, so it is statistically a positive for the Hawks to send a player to the free throw line. That is just pathetic, straight up. Even with bad free throw shooters like Shaq, first of all, he put pressure on the defense to make them foul him to begin with, but second of all, he at least hit 1 of 2 most of the time. At least that's statistically all that it takes to not be an outright negative at the free throw line, and apparently that is too much to ask of Ben Simmons. At this point, Ben has unfortunately been relegated to essentially being a 6'10 Lonzo Ball without the jump shot, and that's still a good player, a pretty damn good player, but in the playoffs, it's not been nearly the guy that he is capable of being, and it sure as hell is not a player that you don't trade for James Harden, or even a player that you wouldn't trade for the likes of like Zach LaVine. At this point, I absolutely would not do a Zach for Ben Simmons trade if I was the Bulls, when if you would asked me a couple of months ago, I would have said, yeah, I'm doing that. Now, I will say Ben's entire talent and his entire resume is not entirely dismissed by this handful of games. However, I do think these handful of games are highlighting his problems in a way that needs to have us be critical of him. You can't just ignore it by saying it's a few games, because really it's highlighting an overarching weakness. Now, until Embiid broke out this year, I was always of the standpoint that they need to trade one of these two guys, and honestly, I would like 5% lean towards Ben Simmons, purely because he is consistently healthy, he's a few years younger, and his contract is not expiring as soon. However, with Embiid being much more healthy lately, at least by comparison to other seasons, granted by not, I wouldn't say much, but definitely a little healthier, more consistent, and just downright way better than Ben Simmons, absolutely not would you trade Embiid over Simmons. At this point, no chance. A couple of months ago, that seemed reasonable, but now, no. You need to trade Ben Simmons from this team, especially if they lose to the Hawks. But the thing about that is, Ben's value is at the lowest now than it has ever been. And at this point, I'm not sure that you could get even a top 30-ish player for him. So that becomes awkward to say the least. So unfortunately, in the case of Ben Simmons, my opinion of him as a player has dropped pretty notably as these playoffs have continued, and it's only gotten worse as time has gone on. And it's just a case now where the Sixers really need to reevaluate what they're doing, because this duo of Ben and Embiid just simply is not working. Ben is getting in the way of Embiid, and even if you want to argue that Ben could be better on his own team, that type of team would not have an Embiid type player that would also get in Ben's way. So ultimately, just not a good situation for either of these players, not a great situation for Philly, and as high as it can get them, I don't think it's getting them to the heights of winning a championship. So trade Ben Simmons. Now, as for what the actual trade is, well, that's a conversation for another day, and I may or may not talk about that if the Hawks actually win this fucking series. So yeah, that's it. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video. That is the end of this video. Please be sure to like, subscribe for NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.